This is Wood-Fired Herping, and I'm Zeev. Each show, I'm going to be bringing you stories from the field, talking to people who are probably way cooler than me, and having a great time doing it. We'll chat about conservation, herping, places you should visit or avoid, photography, and getting skunked as a lifestyle. There'll be herps, food, gear, and more. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to Wood-Fired Herping. Today, I'm joined by Robert Hansen, herpetologist, author, photographer, editor, and longtime voice in our field. Bob co-authored the California Amphibians and Reptiles Field Guide, which if you guys haven't seen yet, you really need to. We'll get into it, but it's the best field guide I've really ever seen. And now he's working on the new Western U.S. Field Guide, again with Jackson Shed. He's been deeply involved in research, science communication, and shaping how we as a community see and understand our herps. And he's one of those people whose, in my opinion, his fingerprints are all over how we do this work and how we exist as herpers. Bob, thanks so much for being here with me.
Zeev, I really appreciate the invitation to talk with you, as always.
So let's start right there with the new Western U.S. Field Guide. I know the California one has been out for a little bit now, but it's pretty new. It's relatively recent. What drove the decision to expand beyond California, and why now?
Okay, so great question. Jackson Shed, who is just a remarkable partner in this process, he's a really talented guy, very knowledgeable herpetologist, lizard expert extraordinaire. And then I knew he had artistic talent, but I didn't know it was as amazing as it was. And for anybody who's gotten the California Field Guide, all the amphibian larval drawings are original color paintings by Jackson. But anyway, so we finished the California Guide. That was about 3 years of full-time work. And we sort of let a few weeks go by and then, thought about, well, what if we wanted to tackle something larger? And I have to share a little bit of a backstory. So probably in about 2017 or so, Jackson and I had been asked to write a book review for the then just published latest edition of the Peterson Guide, the Stebbins Guide to the Western U.S. and Canada for the journal Copia. Mm-hmm. And we undertook the review not thinking that this would be a critical review because we had grown up with Robert Stebbins as the guru of Western herpetology. He was an idol. He had godlike status. And yet this fourth edition really left a lot to be desired. And we found ourselves just uncovering problem after problem. And I think as scientists and who'd been asked to write a professional review, we felt obligated to point out some of that stuff. Well, it ended up being like 10 published pages, probably the longest book review that the journal had ever published. It elicited lots of conversation on social media. And, somebody said, well, maybe you guys should do a Western Field Guide. And I just thought to myself at the time, oh no, what a thankless task. We're looking at like 380 species, how many opportunities to go off the rails and really just look foolish. So that was really never in the cards. And yet, in the aftermath of the California Guide, we found that we worked really well together. We have complementary skill sets. We didn't kill each other.
That's always good.
We said, let's, and I like challenges. So we pitched it to our publisher, Princeton University Press, and they jumped at it. So it's about another, 3 to 4 year project for us. Again, with a whole lot more species and a lot more ground to cover, much of which we have no familiarity with. So it's a daunting challenge because we're talking Alaska plus all of the Western Canadian provinces and then the Western U.S. states. So there you have it. So we began that. I think we signed a contract in March of 24. We've been working at a pretty steady pace. And we've got a long ways to go.
So for the guide itself, you're considering the part of North America that you're covering to be the U.S. and Canada, right? You're not expanding into Mexico?
Yeah, that would be insanity if we had to jump into Mexico because And I have actually a lot of experience in the field in northern Mexico, but the species diversity goes way up there. So you got to draw the line someplace.
When you look at the process of creating this guide that you're doing working on right now, the Western guide, are there any differences in your process or in what you're doing compared to the California guide? Like what lessons do you take from the California guide that are shaping the process for this one?
Well, I think we recognize that the California Guide, for example, came out at 528 pages,
Hmm.
just under a 6 by 9 format. So that is still a manageable thing to haul around with you in the field. But that had 209 species. So if you're going to jump that up to 380, something has to give, right? We
Yeah,
can't have a 700-page or larger
right.
field guide. That might be okay for an online, an ebook, but that won't work for something in print. So we're going to have to modify some of the illustrations. So, for example, I think maybe the coolest aspect of the California guide is that we were able to show lots of variation for individual species. So,
Hmm.
um, for any species that you are familiar with, for which there is some sort of color and pattern variation or differences between male and female or adults and juveniles, we tried to show all of that. So we end up with like 3 plates of California king snakes and two
Yeah.
plates of, rosy boas and mountain kings and so on. We probably can't do that. We're going to have to shrink the size of the images and show fewer examples. Range maps are going to have to be reconfigured, probably to shoehorn more species onto single maps.
Hmm.
And then the species accounts, which were, I will say, marvelously detailed for California, in part because we have a lot of our own knowledge from decades of field experience that we were able to include in the California volume. We're going to have to throttle back on that as well. So just to get to a manageable end product that works for everyone.
Yeah. You mentioned the range maps, and that's something I actually wanted to bring up because I know that in the range maps in the California guide, you guys put a lot of care into not just the clarity and accuracy of them, but even the accessibility of them. And when you told me about it the first time, I just thought it was such a cool process and such a cool thing that I don't think really maybe any other field guide authors have considered. Can you talk a little bit about the field guides and the accessibility kind of
Yeah,
aspect of
so
that?
it's funny. I have to sort of plead ignorance in that we sort of stumbled into this.
Hmm.
So we sent out range maps for review to about 50 or 60 different herpetologists that either had regional or species level expertise. Right? Let us know what's not accurate about these range maps. And of course, we're using multiple colors, especially for things where there are more than one subspecies in the state, or if we're using more than one species on a single map. So we had different colors, and um, we thought they were great. And in particular, I'll share one example: the map for Encetina. So the
Hmm.
salamander Encetina has 7 different subspecies in California. So that means 7 different colors are shown on this map. The map that we produced, the first draft, I thought was a thing of beauty. It was magnificent. So this goes out, and we have actually 2 of our reviewers say, this is a really cool map. However, I'm red green colorblind, and I don't see the distinction between the distributions as you've mapped for these various subspecies.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, geez, we were so clueless. But fortunately, one of these reviewers gave us a link to a free online app called Color Oracle. And what it does, it simply resides in the background on your computer screen, and you can toggle on or off, and everything on your screen will be altered to be as shown through the filter of a certain color vision deficiency. So
Wow.
it gives you a number of conditions, as it were, but we chose, of course, the most prevalent one, which is red green color deficiency, which affects about 4.5% of the adult population.
Wow.
And that allowed us to play around with different colors when we reconfigured the maps to see which ones would still show up in contrast to their neighbors. and it was a magnificent discovery, but we really backed into it. I'm grateful to learn about that, because I do think that the whole premise of universal access is an important one. And basically, it means that you want your information to be accessible to as many people as possible, both in print and, of course, visually. So we then use that throughout our map revision process, and I have made a point of sharing that little story at various book talks that I've given over the last several months.
Yeah. Your career also included time in education leadership, right? How did that background affect how you approach making these guides, and specifically how you make them accessible to a wide audience, right? Professional herpetologists pick it up, it's got something for them. A beginner picks it up, it's got something for them. It's got kind of got something for everybody.
Well, I think really ever since I finished graduate school, I've had feet in multiple arenas of herpetology, both as a science teacher,
Hmm.
a school administrator, but then along the way, I was sort of working, early in the morning and late at night as editor of Herpetological Review, and I did
Right.
that for 30 years. So uh, I think collectively that sort of drives home the importance of uh, effective science communication. And I think maybe especially for Herp Review, um, that is a journal, for those unfamiliar with it, that purposely casts a broad net. So we encourage field reports from amateurs, if you will. I'm almost reluctant to use the term amateur, because
Hmm.
frankly, um, I know a lot of amateurs that are more knowledgeable about species X, Y, and Z than people who have letters after their names. But
Right.
be that as it may, so the other thing with Herp Review is that we have a lot of authors whose native language is not English. And especially if they were students, it was important to us to ensure that their scientific contributions made it into print. And we were ready to facilitate that through editing to an extent that probably wouldn't have existed in other outlets.
Hmm.
We just felt that was part of our mission as part of our parent organization, SSAR, the Society for the Study of Amphibians and Reptiles, which has always prided itself on international outreach. And through all of that, it really aided my ability. And I will say this, I don't necessarily consider myself a great writer, but I learned a lot as an editor. And I also learned a lot from using graduate student copy editors, especially from the University of Kansas.
Hmm.
So the University of Kansas herpetology program had a long tradition of really doing a nice job of preparing their PhD students for talks and publications. It was not simply, they were never left to their own devices. So they really were put through the paces on learning proper grammar and how to construct scientific papers and how to prepare a talk. So I was always blessed by having sort of a rotating cast of characters of students who went on to get PhDs as copy editors. And I really learned a lot from the way that they went through manuscripts that had been accepted for publication. And it really helped me become a more effective editor, and I think ultimately an effective writer and communicator.
Yeah. At the heart of it, with the California guide that's out there and in people's hands now, and the Western guide that's coming out, I think something that I've found really cool with it is how excitedly it's been embraced by the field herping community as well as every other part of the herpetology world. There's so many facets and almost sub factions to the herpetology world, and they don't often agree on a lot. But the California guide has really been embraced, and I started seeing it in the field when I'd go field herping with other people in California. Often they'd have it with them in recent times, and at the heart of bringing that guide out into the world, what do you hope that people take from it and actually do differently in the field because of these guides?
Well, I don't pretend to be able to influence people's behavior, but I will say, in terms of that energy and that enthusiasm, I think it comes from two places. One is we grew up as guys in the field
Hmm.
chasing amphibians and reptiles. We know all about that excitement, and I'm old enough, pre-internet field herping, right? In fact, herping was not a term.
Right.
That did not exist when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Uh, you just went out, and I think the term was collecting, even if you weren't, literally collecting stuff. But
Hmm.
uh, so herping came on much later. But I think, we've both spent a tremendous amount of time in the field. We get as excited as the next person. So there is that whole enthusiasm, and that doesn't change whether you're, 12 years old or 45 or 70. The other piece of that, um, at least with respect to that field guide, is there were a lot of people involved in that, including you.
Hmm.
So I haven't, maybe I've lost count, but our acknowledgments for the California guide probably runs to what, like 270 or something, or 260.
Wow.
So that, those are not all people who have PhDs. In fact, the majority are folks that might be known within the herper community, but they might not be known within the academic herpetological community. So, and the reason that happened is that we cast the net broadly in terms of soliciting help, right? It's like we can take 10 years to do this, or we can do it in 3 or 4 years if we have some help. So we had lots of people who said, yeah, send me a list of what you need. I'll see what I can do. And the response was just phenomenal. It was really, I think I said this maybe in the introduction to the field guide, where this is probably the most gratifying aspect of preparing the field guide was, the enthusiasm with which this whole project was embraced. And then when the book is published and people can point to a particular photo of a lizard or a snake or a salamander and say, that was my animal.
Right.
And that has happened multiple times, and they're just so stoked. So we had zoos involved. We had museum curators running out catching stuff for us. So we had the whole professional community behind this, but also you know the amateurs, or the citizen scientists contingent as well.
Right. It being part of that was such a cool experience for me, and I can only imagine from your side what it was like to have, for me it was one person going, I was contributing to it. I can only imagine from your side having everybody coming in like me must have been just such a great experience. Even just the meetups where we'd hand off things were always a great time. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and there were nights, there's be a night where my wife and I are sitting at the dinner table, and my phone, will buzz. Like one night it buzzed 3 different times. You know, somebody, Z was out in the Mojave Desert, who had just found this and sends me a photo. Do you still need this? Somebody else is up on the North Coast, and that kind of thing. And that was pretty intense for a good stretch. The reason that was necessary is because we were photographing everything from scratch on a white
Right.
background. So if you already have the field guide, you know that. But if you haven't seen it, everything is on a neutral background, which we felt was a superior way to depict species. And so, yeah, it meant chasing down lots of things. We had thousands and thousands of images taken to end up with something like 945
Yeah.
color photos.
The photos are, I would say the best part of the book, but every part's the best part. So it's one of the best parts of the book. Switching tracks for a second, talking about the field, like you've been running a long-term elevation transect study where the Eastern Sierra and the Mojave meet. Um, how long have you been working on that study, and if stuff you can tell us about
Yeah,
it?
I won't mention the name, but I will say this started in 1982.
Wow.
So that's a long time ago. I was working as a contract biologist with the Forest Service, doing some surveys in the southern Sierra Nevada up in the mountains.
Hmm.
And my field assistant and we'd be camping. And of course, we'd work all day. We'd have a mountain campsite. So maybe a fire, sitting around drinking adult beverages,
Yeah.
and telling war stories, right? Herp stories. But after a while, you're doing this night after night. It's like, you know what? We got to do something else. Let's run down to the desert. Well, the desert was just sort of off the eastern side of the Sierra Nevada. We can drop down to the desert and cruise around. So we did that. Found a few snakes that night, but then coming back up this paved road that traverses the eastern slope, so it's the dry desert facing slope of the southern Sierra Nevada,
Hmm.
we were finding snakes. And what was amazing to me is that not only did we find snakes down on the desert floor, but we found snakes all along this canyon that ascended to. So the desert floor is sitting about 2,600 feet in elevation, and the head of the canyon is about 6,200 feet. So it's a pretty good elevational gradient, but we were finding snakes almost all the way to the top.
Wow.
And it occurred to me, I'm an avid student, if you will, of road-based transect studies, especially for snakes. Have collected all the literature on that stuff. I just think it's a fascinating way to sample a community, typically of desert snakes, right? So I thought this would make a pretty cool study. And then as I did a little more research, it was like no study that's ever been published has followed an elevational transect. In other words, you can't always find that ideal place. What you want, of course, obviously a place that has snakes, that has a relatively low traffic volume. And so you got to take what you can get, right? I mean, pick a place in Southern California where that's even a possibility,
Right.
right? I can't really think of too many, or that aren't like Whitewater Canyon crawling with herpers.
Right.
And the reason that that would be an issue is that when you have other herpers present, it confounds your data gathering. Even if they're collecting stuff or not, you're not the one finding those, and those are data points that are lost. So it's really important for us to work in a place where we don't have interference. And I'm fine with people being on our site when we're not there. And
Right.
frankly, it doesn't matter at all if they're collecting stuff, because you got wide open desert. It's not going to impact the population.
Right.
So 1982, that started. It has gone on almost every year since then.
Wow.
There's been a couple of years where forest fires prevented us from accessing the site. But otherwise, I think I think this last year or this year is like year 45. So
Wow.
we're approaching a sample size of 3,000 snakes.
Wow.
And it's not the snakiest place out in the desert by any stretch.
Mhm.
There are plenty of other places to find more snakes, and also the things that herpers at least traditionally are most interested in, like rosy boas and Panamint rattlesnakes and
Right.
lyre snakes and so forth. But again, it does afford us a look at an elevational transect. So what's been kind of fun is that, when you're sort of in it doing it, you don't necessarily recognize certain patterns. But after a while, when you got several thousand records, and you put this in an Excel spreadsheet, and then you start cranking out some graphs, it's like, oh, geez, there's some pretty cool little patterns here. You can look at differences in activity levels between adults and juveniles, or differences across species,
Mhm.
or even things like which species are most likely to become DORs. There's just all sorts of fun things. You can look at percentage of male versus female adults that are
Mhm.
found on the road. There's all kinds of questions that can be asked, some of which we didn't even know to ask until, after we're looking at some preliminary data.
Right. Yeah, no, the benefit of that kind of long-term data is something you could never get in a season or two or five or even 10 at this point. Like you said, you mentioned you're going on 40 something years. It's just a wealth of data. Also, just how it's changed over time, right? I'm sure there's been differences in what you're finding and how you're finding now compared to 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah, I can't say for sure. When we started out, climate change was not an expression that was on anybody's lips.
Sure.
But as we look back on it, we are going to have a foundational data set. Now, whether snakes, which have relatively long generation times compared to things like small mammals or lizards, are going to be much slower to show changes than those other things.
Hmm.
So I think in fact, there's already studies that have shown changes in things that have they're fairly short-lived and have rapid turnover of populations. But for snakes, it's a different matter. And I think it'll also vary based upon what kind of snake it is. So I think long-lived rodent-eating snakes are going to be slower to show any change. Smaller insectivores,
Hmm.
I would predict, will respond more quickly. But it's really difficult to say whether anything has changed at this point, because where we work is in the rain shadow of the Sierra Nevada. It is a place that is used to really low rainfall. I think the average down low is like 4 inches a year.
Wow.
And it's also accustomed to wide swings in precipitation levels that reflect like single storm events, right? So it's not like you can say, well, on average, we get 6 inches of rain and you can sort of count on that every year. No, it's all over the map. So uh, what do those populations do just, 1,000 years ago? What were they doing? Did they just sort of ebb and flow and, do these modest fluctuations, or are we going to now see something that's a little more consequential? Um, if you have multi-year droughts, what happens? Well, some obvious predictions: adult females don't, develop sufficient fat reserves to reproduce, so you're going to have fewer babies being born, that kind of thing. But will the adults persist? What about a drought of 5 or 6 years? What is
Yeah.
that going to do?
Yeah.
So those are things that are really difficult to get at and tease apart from other background possibilities.
Hmm.
Um, but it's certainly interesting, and I'm looking forward to getting this thing published at some point, and then I'm sure we'll continue to gather data.
Sure.
But it's the kind of thing that the other thing you mentioned, how difficult long-term studies are, and
Right.
for two reasons. One, it's expensive. Secondly, people who are in academic positions aren't going to touch it with a 10-foot pole, because
Right.
any of their research that is tied to funding has got to show products, right? In other words, research papers published at a regular interval. If you're going to do something for 30 or 40 or 50 years, and then you're going to say, oh, here it is.
Right.
Well, that's just not going to fly. So
Yeah.
it has to be done either by professionals who simply want to do this
Hmm.
and can train others to sort of carry on, or amateur herpers.
Yeah.
And I think what we're doing, I call it recreational science. There's nothing sophisticated about it. It's just go out, see what you find, and then obviously do a great job of recording data.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of related to what you were just talking about, and you also touched upon this a little bit earlier when you were talking about your time at Herp Review. When you were editor of Herp Review, Herpetological Review, what did it show you about the herp community overall? Because you mentioned that you made it an effort to really reach out and include many aspects of the herp community, right? Not just academics. And so, what did it teach you about the community and the kinds of voices that make it up?
Well, that's a great question. As I touched on earlier,
Hmm.
Herp Review and its parent organization, SSAR, are a little bit different. We have always made a point of incorporating the zoo community in what we do, regional herp societies when those were actually a thing, mostly pre-internet. Um, we've encouraged participation by non-affiliated people, citizen scientists and so forth, in reporting range extensions or
Yeah.
novel natural history observations. And so we do have a broader net than I think some other professional herpetological societies do, and that is by design. So I define the herp community, and I'll put that herp community in air quotes,
Sure.
broadly. So if you have more than a passing interest in amphibians or reptiles, and you spend time studying them or observing them in the field, then you're a part of the community. And it's definitely changed a great deal in the last 40 years or so that I've been intimately involved. And I'll provide one example. So my first professional meeting was in 1978 at Arizona State University. And as I recall, there were exactly 2 female graduate students in attendance. I'm
Hmm.
talking about like my contemporaries, right? Now, as I recall, so 2 females and at least 100 males. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Now, as of this year, and I attend the professional meetings annually, I think females now outnumber guys at these meetings. So that is a remarkable turnaround. Now, the other aspect of this can be seen in the changes of who studies which species. And this is really a fun thing to look at.
Hmm.
So years ago, the few female herpetologists almost always studied amphibians. They researched frogs or salamanders. A handful studied lizards. Hardly anyone studied snakes, and no females conducted research on venomous snakes or large boids. those are the domain of the manliest of the herpetologists, right? The most
Right.
macho guys are going to study venomous snakes and big snakes. Now, today, there are still remnants of this taxonomic imbalance, but the distinctions are not as obvious. So, this breakdown by gender is a huge shift. And then the other shift has been the growth of herpetology as a scientific discipline in less developed countries.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is really important because let's face it, the greatest herp species diversity lies where? Well, in tropical or subtropical parts of the world,
Yeah.
mostly in less developed countries. And it's also where the greatest conservation needs occur, where extinctions have already happened and with more on the horizon. So we certainly can't, I say we, the collective we, cannot depend on the developed nations, US, Canada, European nations, to quote, save biodiversity in these
Right.
places. But we surely can do our part to increase the capacity for in-country research, education, and conservation. And that's why I always like to tout the efforts of SSCR, which is an organization that's always attempted inclusion and even has specific programs and funding streams to support international students. We also, as I alluded to in my tenure as editor of Herp Review, we made a point of assisting particularly students, but outside the US whose native language is not English in preparing their notes for publication, right? Our goal, in fact, when I started, well, we ended up with like a staff of 44 people with Herp Review. When I started, it was 10, right? So we really grew the journal. And I always was reminding the team that our mission is one of service, right? We are not gatekeepers.
Right.
We want to facilitate. Our goal is to help our authors present the results of their research in the best possible manner. And so, in particular, now, if you're a native English speaker and you've just been lazy in preparing a manuscript,
Yeah.
you're probably not going to get a lot of sympathy from us.
Right.
But if you're a young person who's, I admire the heck out of them for attempting a manuscript in a language that they're really not all that comfortable with.
Right.
We're going to go out of our way to help them get that to a point of publication. So I am grateful that that was always important to us, and I think it really made a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Switching tacks for a minute, I want to talk about photography for a second because it's something we both enjoy and we both really get into. And I've always felt the few times that I've been lucky enough to watch you photograph, I think have only been for the guide, and I think once in the field too. But your approach to photography for me is just insofar as you set up even is quite unique. The multi-flash, almost like studio in the field setup. How did you get to that method to where you are now with your photography?
We're just watching other people. I mean, I started, well, in slide film, right? So I am definitely not a professional photographer by any stretch of the imagination. I'm pretty good at shooting herps under specific conditions. But for example, I don't attempt to photograph birds.
Yeah.
God forbid, or people portraits, or action photos, or anything like that.
Right.
Now, if you were not, and I share this because I know people who listen to podcasts, a lot of them are a whole lot younger than I am, and only sort of have grown up in a digital camera era. But if you were not an active photographer before about 2003, you likely cannot appreciate the revolution that has come about through digital photography.
Yeah.
So previously, we shot slide film. And if you were serious and you wanted it developed properly, you had to send it off to a Kodak lab.
Right.
And kind of the last one standing was in Maryland.
Wow.
So, and then further, if you didn't trust the Postal Service to make sure that your roll of film made it back there, you would send it FedEx. So that was expensive. So what most of us would do, I would go through like many rolls of film during spring and summer field work. And then once I had a bunch of these rolls ready for development, I'd package them up, send them off via FedEx. But the interval between taking images and seeing the results might stretch to months.
Wow.
Right? I might have been out salamandering in January and February, but not sending stuff back to the Kodak lab until end of summer.
Right.
So thus there was a huge delay in getting any feedback. You
Wow.
didn't know if your shots were any good. You had no idea. I mean, obviously, if you're shooting sort of the same thing over and over, you kind of know what your settings are going to be. And if you're using flash, you would do what we call bracketing, which is to bump up, by adjusting your f-stop, either compensate, try and bump up the lighting or drop it down. So you'd have one that you thought was right on the money and then one above, one below, and hope to
Hmm.
get lucky, right? So that part, though, that varied with the intensity of the background. If you had a dark substrate, it's wintertime, dark leaf litter with a salamander on that, it's going to just soak up the light. So a little bit scary. And of course, we didn't have any computer software to fix our photos,
Right.
and
What you took is
after the
what you
fact,
had.
right?
Yeah.
There's no such thing as post-processing.
Right.
So um, it's just such a fundamental change. Now, maybe you took photos of this super rare species that you were just so stoked to find, or you took a trip out of the country. Maybe you went to India or Mexico, and you have all these what you hope are awesome photos, but were they properly exposed? Was the eye in focus? But so now you can literally check your work in seconds and
Right.
make
As you're
necessary
going. Yeah.
adjustments on the fly. So it is an absolute game changer. There was a time where, frankly, so we started, I'll tie in Herp Review here. So we started highlighting great herp photography on the covers of Herp Review in the mid 1990s.
Hmm.
At that time, there were not that many people, and frankly, most folks who paid attention could name them. Right? We could run off the list of names of people that were sort of recognized herp photographers.
Hmm.
Now, I mean, sure, we know there's some people who just take exquisite images and all that, but
Right.
there's so much stuff that you can see on Instagram or Facebook every single day of the week by different people.
Yeah.
So it has really changed how we do what we do and who can participate. So it's fundamentally altered, I think, field experiences. And then, we're able to see just all kinds of cool species that are brought to us by people who probably never would have bothered, if we were doing this 30 years ago.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting having you talk about how photography was to seeing where you are now with it, where you're, we were in West Texas. You're in a, not at home. You're not near a home office at all. And you have your computer there, you have your multi-light setup, the digital camera, and how you're able to just photograph. We went through so many specimens in such a short time because, like you said, you're able to just on the fly make adjustments. How has that the photography process been specifically for the field guide? How has that been for you?
Well, it's been good, and you had asked me earlier, what has maybe helped me along the way. I will say, and I mentioned that learning from others, but I should
Hmm.
specifically say, um, my friend Brad Alexander and I took several trips to West Texas together, and at the time, I was shooting two flashes through diffusers that were off camera and so forth, and getting really nice images. Brad is the one who introduced me to the whole sort of studio lighting thing, where
Hmm.
you're either shooting through a softbox that's on an elevated light stand, or really two of those, one on each side. Or in my case, what I ended up going to was indirect lighting, right? So
Hmm.
shooting upward into reflective umbrellas. And the slick thing about that, at least again for a studio setting, I need to make a distinction
Right.
here
Right.
between that and field, is that there's no recycling time. You're not waiting for batteries to recharge. It's sort of instantaneous. You can really go through images while an animal is in a position that you want in short order. And of course, you can quickly check and make adjustments in exposure. So you really tend to get high quality images without a heck of a lot of effort. I would say the technical end of it is really pretty simple. Maybe where I hesitate to say magic or art, but the skill probably comes in with simply knowing the animals,
Yeah.
knowing what this thing should be doing, what it will do, what is a natural pose.
Hmm.
And then, you end up with things that are very appropriate, especially for a field guide format. And, anybody who then sees that, who is quite familiar with the species, can say, oh, yeah, okay, they did a good job with that one. So that's maybe where I think both Jackson and I have because we know the animals, and
Right.
so yeah, there you have it.
Yeah.
That's nothing terribly special. And I will say, as I sometimes people see all the setup that I use
Hmm.
when I travel, and I point out, all of that is the price of a single Nikon flash.
Yeah. Kind of expanding on that, on what you were just saying, how do you decide what makes the final cut for a field guide photo?
Well, in some cases, we can't be too choosy because
Sure.
it's all we got.
I've
There are
witnessed a
things that
couple
are,
snakes like that with you.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a look, and I will say Jackson and I bounce things off of each other, and there are many things that I think, um, I think this is I've taken a shot, and he says, nah,
Yeah.
we can do better, and maybe it's something I still have, so I can reshoot. Um, but he's very critical, and of course, I think part of that comes from being a great artist. He has an eye for detail, some things that I might not see. But we're both. I think we kind of know when we've nailed it, and there are some images that aren't awesome,
Hmm.
but that's just the way it goes.
Are you aiming for the most naturalistic pose in the sense of the most what would be almost in situ, or is it more of a what's the best representative of the snake? How can I, or whatever herp it is, how can I best represent all of it? Which side do you
Yeah,
lean
so it's
towards
it's
more?
a it's a it's a fine line. I think there are some lizards. So let's use lizards with long tails,
Hmm.
for example. So let's think of a southern alligator lizard with an original tail.
Sure.
So if you encountered a southern alligator lizard in the field with an original tail, which is well longer than the body length, and then try and just replicate that in a studio setting, well, you're going to have a really small image. That's going to be, 2/3 tail. And that doesn't serve anybody well.
Yeah.
Now, we don't want to loop the tail around, clear
Right.
up to the head and then back again, because that looks just a little too fakey.
Right.
So there's a happy medium, and we play around with that. And so when you're shooting, a lot of guys are familiar with this expression, safety shot, right? You sort of
Hmm.
start with what the animal's
Right.
going to give you, and then you go from there. And a lot of that involves, in the case of lizards or salamanders, messing with the tail, or even snakes for that matter. In the case of lizards, frogs, well, things with toes, we are really mindful of toe position. So we will typically have like a toothpick with us
Hmm.
if we need to separate toes. And we also want to depict the forelimb that is farthest away from the camera, right? So in other words, what you're seeing is not a three-legged animal. We
Right.
want to see that backside forelimb, and that is a trick, because there are some species that just don't want to do that, and so
Right.
then you shift. So night lizards, for example, want to remain in a kind of a flattened position, so you change the angle of the photo to more of a dorsal view rather than the dorsolateral view that we typically employ.
Yeah. All right. So food. I know you love food probably as much as I do, honestly. We have shared many great conversations about food. I know you've also traveled quite widely and have been lucky to get around. Do you have any especially memorable food memories or stories that are either part of herping or completely unrelated?
Boy,
I
well,
know
I have to
I know I
apologize.
through like a wide question at you.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like a fish out of water here because I'm talking to a foodie,
Well,
uh, and I am not one. I appreciate good food as much as the next person, but and I will say this though about meals and herp activity,
hmm.
and I find this to be true, or at least I have found this to be true of American herpers, is that most of us, especially when I was younger, we were in a go 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 mode,
Yeah.
right? We did not want to quote waste time
Right, right.
by by prepping meals and then having to stop and eat, right? It was okay, we've herped all day, we've done daytime stuff. We're going to take a short break just to grab something to eat, and then if we're in the desert, we're going to go night driving.
Yeah.
Um, and that was the norm, right? 20s, 30s, 40s. Uh, so there really I never really took a whole lot of stuff with me in the field for meal prep. It was just, well, okay, we'll figure it out as we're out there.
Right. We'll see what the
I
local gas
found,
station has.
yeah, God, yeah. So, that is not the case in other countries, right? So
Yeah.
where the pace is often much, much slower.
Right.
Um, People are more inclined to start later in the day, stop for meals. It's a very important thing.
Hmm.
And the contrast is just striking. I think the first time I experienced that, especially in Mexico. But I want to say this, that I think meals in the field, especially if they involve wild sourced items,
Hmm.
invariably are great.
Yes,
Um,
100%. I've
and
never
and
had a bad
so
one.
one yeah, so one memorable field meal uh, that I remember from long ago. So a buddy and I had discovered the very first population of Sierra Nevada yellow-legged frogs that was actually east of the Sierra Nevada.
Hmm.
It was almost to the Nevada border. It was an area
Wow.
south of Mono Lake in far eastern California. It was at high elevation. It was a meadow that was composed of volcanic ash. So it was dry as a bone, but it had this narrow ribbon of green, this tiny
Hmm.
perennial stream that was teeming with frogs. Now they were unknown for anywhere east of the Sierra, so this was an exciting discovery.
Yeah.
And so we spent the better part of an afternoon uh, capturing frogs, measuring them, taking notes, doing all this documentation. But there were fish there too.
Hmm.
So that was bad news. They were brook trout, which are not native.
Hmm.
And somebody long ago had decided that trout should be there, so they introduced brook trout. So there were all these brook trout in this stream was maybe only like 3 to 4 feet wide, and it had undercut banks. Well, I happened to have a fish net with me, and so we just went along and we captured as many trout as we could, and they were all really nice sized trout. So we cleaned them properly. We cooked a number of them over an improvised grill that night. I think I brought some rice aroni with me, and somehow had a bottle of wine,
Yeah.
and it was just the most
You
amazing
mean you mean
meal.
you don't take a bottle of wine every time in the field? I thought that was
No, like
standard.
never,
Yeah.
never, like never once. Beer is that's a given, but
Sure.
uh, the wine. So it was just an incredible thing. Of course, the trout were tremendous, and we were doing an ecological service.
Yeah. It's like a win-win.
And then the other thing about meals, I mean,
Hmm.
like in Mexico, and I know a lot of people have now spent time in Mexico, but um, you know, street vendors, taco trucks, and so forth,
Yeah.
those are great meals,
Yeah.
and generally pretty safe. I've had great experiences, you know, throughout Mexico, getting food from street vendors. It's a lot of fun, and of course, it's wonderfully affordable.
Yeah, anywhere I've been in the world, whether it's, Mexico or Southeast Asia or even New York, to get a feel for how people eat and what the food is of the area, I think street vendors is the way to go. It's the most authentic depiction, I think, of how people are eating. I love street vendors. I love street food altogether. Before I start wrapping up, there's some questions that I decided just one episode ago to start asking my guests each time. And so I'm going to ask them to you. You can answer them as short or as long as you'd like, just however you'd like to. The first one is what, sitting here today, what gives you hope for the future of herping or science in general right now?
There's a lot of really smart young people.
Hmm.
So I am fortunate in that I am able to attend every year the professional meeting of the North American Herpetological Societies, and I sit through a lot of talks, many of which are presented by graduate students or in some cases even undergrads, and I am blown away by how smart people are.
Yeah.
Uh, they're terrific. They're you know they're great thinkers. They employ innovation in their research, and I just hope that we have jobs for all of them. But there is no shortage of talent, and this extends to not just American students, but students from other countries that attend these meetings. There's just a lot of smart young people, and of course, being that they're young, they're inevitably idealistic. So that's a good thing. So that gives me hope.
Great. What's something that we as a community, the herp community in general, need to stop doing, in your opinion?
Well, I don't want to be the one that is a finger wagger.
Sure.
And I don't
Well, this is your opportunity. Wag that finger.
know. I mean, I don't think it's that big of a deal,
Yeah.
but I'm not a fan of folks who use herps as props for social media stuff. In other words, I don't have a problem with YouTube or Instagrammers or whatever that are whatever. I'll use the term legit.
Hmm. Yeah,
Herpers would say, "Oh yeah, he's legit," or "This
absolutely.
guy's a sham," or whatever, or a fraud.
Right.
They're using their animals, they're exploiting. I think that's the word I want, right? Who
Yeah.
exploit animals for clicks or likes or whatever. Uh, Maybe there's no real harm in it, other than
Hmm.
I have to think that someone else is going to emulate that, and that
Yes, a hundred
behavior is
percent.
only going to increase. So I'm fine with people who take the camera along, the GoPro or whatever, when they're herping in the field and do narrations. That's great
Yeah. Yeah, there's some
because I
great
think,
creators out there who make great content like that.
yeah,
And then
and I
there's
mean the rest of us can enjoy the field vicariously, right?
right.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's really not different than wildlife documentaries that we would have watched on broadcast TV.
Right.
But now sort of anybody can do that, so that's cool.
Yeah.
But I think the other
The
stuff is,
exploitive stuff. Yeah,
again, I don't
absolutely.
know how problematic it is, but I just don't like the exploitation. I think it's cringeworthy,
Hmm.
and I'm glad I don't know those folks.
Yeah, I completely agree. All right, what's your herping hot take or unpopular opinion? What you've gotten side eye from before when you've said it or when you've opined it.
Oh, oh geez. Uh, no, I don't have a
You don't have any unpopular opinion. All your opinions are popular, huh?
my gosh. Hmm. Okay. Yeah, Here's one. And this is certainly not restricted to herpetology, though.
Okay.
I mean, anybody who spends time on social media
Hmm.
who's got half a brain realizes that there are a lot of uninformed folks out there.
Yeah.
And the Dunning-Kruger effect is in fine form on
Yes.
the internet, and flying its colors proudly. And you are involved as an admin
Hmm.
for some of the Snake ID pages. And I think
Yeah, we
one
see
thing
a
I would
lot of
like
that.
to
Yeah.
see us do is get away from the guessing game,
Hmm.
number one. In other words, you don't win a prize for some random guess when
Right.
some person in good faith posts a photo and they just want to know what it is and
Right.
maybe a little something about it. Well, we don't need 50 people jumping in with a guess.
Right.
And then the other thing is
Yes, the
that there
bane of
might
my
be three or four
existence.
people who are experts who've already weighed in and told you what it is, and then you have somebody else who says no. So, as one example that just happened to me a day or two ago,
Hmm.
and it wasn't really an argument with me, but there was a photo posted of a Mojave rattlesnake,
Hmm.
and what is this? So various people say things. Okay, Mojave green, of course, was one of the responses, and I posted a plate from our field guide, which happens to show two shades of green and then a nice brown adult.
Hmm.
Right. In fact, I think you were involved in collecting those animals.
I think so. Yeah.
So, and I did that just to point out that, hey, not all Mojave rattlesnakes are green. That's why the common name of Mojave green is not really appropriate. And somebody responded with, they change colors seasonally.
I haven't heard that one yet.
They're green
That's
in
a
the
new
spring
one.
and they shift to brown in summer and fall.
Of course, to blend in with the browning foliage. Of
And
course.
I didn't respond. I was I chuckled.
Yeah.
I made a point of writing it down. I thought, well, that's a different take.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't think that the various social media platforms, some of them do a great job. So one of the really good ones is the National Snakebite Support
Hmm.
page,
Yes,
which
absolutely.
is for active bites of both pets like dogs or cats, but
Yeah.
also humans, right? And it's run by a group of veterinarians and MDs,
Right.
and they have very strict rules. You cannot comment on a post unless you are the original poster. You just got bit by something, or you're one of the the moderators who's offering expert information.
Right.
And if you chime in, you are immediately banned for life, no appeal.
Right.
And so people learn the hard way. And I don't think that, these other sites need to be run that way, but there needs to be some happy
No,
medium
the
where,
the NSS site is absolutely, I think, the standard for what Facebook groups
okay,
could be. I
yeah,
have plenty
yeah,
of friends who work on staff there. They have some moderators that just are working as moderating the group because the DVMs and the MDs don't have time to sit there, deleting comments and banning people. And so there's some crossover between the admins I work with in other groups and their work in NSS. And I've always admired just how committed they are to it and how instantaneously there's always someone there. You never post and see something 6 hours later someone responds to you. It's an incredible site. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, last question. We were talking about road cruising earlier. What's your go-to road cruising snack? Something you have with you anytime you're road cruising, or try to have with you anytime you're out there road cruising?
I'm not a superstitious person, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm not somebody who's, I got to have this, or I'm not going to
Well,
find any snakes.
that makes you a
Uh,
rarity in the community.
well, I guess I want to make sure I have something with some caffeine. So
Mm-hmm.
it might be like Diet Dr. Pepper, uh, which I don't normally even buy. The only
Yeah,
time I ever buy it, frankly, is if I'm in the field.
yeah,
And then I might have something like a Snickers candy bar, or a banana, because when we're running our transects, sometimes the nights are really slow, and yet we feel an obligation to continue, going back and forth,
mm-hmm.
just because that's what we're supposed to do, even though we might not see a snake for an hour and a half. So you kind of need something to perk you up. But yeah, no special snacks. That's kind of how we survive. I will say that I've told this story, but because it's a night driving story.
Mm-hmm.
When we started, we didn't have satellite radio.
Right.
Um, if you didn't have music with you, and where we are, we didn't get radio reception. You get AM stations, but maybe only one or two, and they'd be out of like Las Vegas or Salt Lake
Yeah.
City. And one of the late night shows that was on, that was broadcast coast to coast, was this Art Bell program out of a outpost in Nevada. And Art Bell's thing was sort of UFOs, paranormal phenomena. And so he was legendary. And people would call in from everywhere, and talk about, their alien abduction and all kinds of just off the wall stuff. So that's what we were reduced to when we sort of ran out of herp stories to tell. Because
Yeah.
the other thing that happens when things are really slow is you start talking about, well, why do snakes come out when they do?
Right.
Right?
Yeah,
Who
that's
can
yeah.
explain? Who can explain like a 30 snake night one night, you go back on the same road the next night under seemingly identical conditions and find three snakes?
Right. Yeah, that's
What's
something
that
we've
all
talked
about?
about before. Yeah, I mean, there's so much that we have no idea about still. You know, there's so many of those, like you're saying, the factors that I think we talked about it one night when we met out at your study site, um, about how the previous night, John Lauerman, another contributor, and I had gone out and we'd had, I think, a 25 or 30 snake night. And sure enough, and this was the next night. And we'd been out, I think, 5 or 6 hours at that point, and we'd seen one. Conditions, the temperatures were the same. The moon phase is basically the same. It's a night later. Wind's the same. Cloud cover's the same. What's going on? You know? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that is a perennial topic of conversation, either in vehicles or online, and I don't think anybody really knows the answer, especially when you're looking at multiple species of animals.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sure their responses are different, but the only way to get at that kind of a question would be to work the same site night after night after night through a season, and then probably
Probably many
rinse and
seasons.
repeat the
Yeah.
whole next year.
Right.
And most people just don't have that kind of patience or gas money to
Yeah.
pull that off. I mean, is it moon? Is it rodent activity? Is it God? I mean, I don't know.
Right. It's one of those things we're going to keep talking about and hypothesizing
Well,
until the day.
my friend Jason Jones,
Hmm.
who resides in Mexico, has an idea. He and I have discussed this, and
Hmm.
he um, invokes drive theory, which is a human psychological uh, position that basically says, our behaviors are driven
Hmm.
by the need for food, sex,
Right.
shelter, those kinds of things. And so if you apply that to a snake population, especially in springtime, and looking at just adult snakes, for example, most of the animals coming out are males. They come out on night one. Do they find a mate or a meal? If they do they then come out again the second night? Probably not,
Right.
right? The more nights that you're out on the surface, you have greater exposure to predators.
Right.
So if you accomplish your goal, if you've met your drive, you're probably going to remain hidden, and you would expect, like maybe in a new moon cycle, to see an increasing percentage of the population be below ground.
Mm-hmm.
That's one idea.
Yeah,
Um, again,
that's a
it's
fair
not
one.
something that is necessarily supported by data, but
Right.
it's a fun thing to kick around.
I think it's one of those things that it would be really hard to ever have a position supported by data unless you really, really spend your whole life on it. Uh, Bob, thank you so much for sharing your stories, your perspective, and your work with us. If people are interested in the California Guide and they don't have it for some reason, they should. But if they don't yet, where can they go to get it?
Well, you can go to the Princeton University Press website, but you can also go to Amazon, any other online retailer. It's widely available. The first printing has been sold out.
Wow,
Second printing copies, I think, are now in the warehouse. So yeah,
that's
it's
exciting.
it's
I didn't
it's a
realize you were on
bargain
the second
too.
printing. That's really exciting.
Yeah, the list price is $35, but you can get it cheaper on Amazon. And frankly, at 528 pages for 35
I
bucks,
know.
that's a
I couldn't
steal.
believe it. I couldn't believe the price when you first told me. Um, when is the Western U.S. Guide scheduled to come out?
So I would think it'll be 2028.
Okay.
We are hoping to deliver it to the publisher in 27, and then it's about a year in production after that.
Right. Well, thank you again. And as far as the show, you can follow the show at Wood-Fired Herping on Instagram. Join the Wood-Fired Herping podcast group on Facebook. Thanks for listening, and until next time.